All right, hey everyone, welcome to special edition of the Tellor Dev Call. This one we're doing a walkthrough for 360. So some of the reporters have actually asked for it to see where things have changed and what we're updating. So we're just going to walk through the whole system. So the vast majority of it will have no bearings on reporters whatsoever. We'll try and sort of point out where it might be different. We'll try and keep in mind, okay, this is actually a change from the other Tellor system, but we're just going to actually walk through all the code and hopefully it gives you guys a good idea about where we're at. And yeah, Tim will be leading the talk. So Tim, take it away.
Okay. So I'm gonna start by talking in terms of certain like user groups or profiles. So from the perspective of a staker, you will first have to approve a token deposit. And that's kind of one change in Tellor on mainnet Ethereum. So now you have to always approve.
So Tim, are we going to walk through like every line of the contracts?
No, just kind of the most important things for different user groups. Or we want to do that?
I was thinking we walk through them. Like, let's just do the whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so if you want to talk like overall contract structure that we got going on, because I think there's multiple repos that people have to take into account, and then yeah, let's just deep dive into all of them so people can see what they all do and different things.
Okay. So here we have Tellor Flex, and that is the Oracle contract. And so that handles staking, reporting, and also removing values as controlled by governance. So just at the top here, we have all sorts of storage and some structs that contain all the reported data and all the staker info. All of these parameters will be more relevant as we see the different functions in this contract. There's a number of events. So if we look at the constructor, you can see it takes a token address. So it can take any ERC20 token, a reporting lock, a stake amount dollar target, a staking token price, and a staking token price query ID. So those last three are a big new change for Tellor 360, where the stake amount is, it targets a certain dollar amount. So it uses the reported TRB price, and it will adjust the single stake amount based on that current TRB price.
So you want to give an example of how that would work? So
yeah, so let's say we have a target dollar amount of $1,000, and the TRB price is $10, then that will make a stake amount of 100 TRB. But then if next week the TRB price goes up to $20, then the stake amount will adjust to 50 TRB. And so that will always be changing. But that stake amount doesn't adjust until someone, any address, manually calls an update stake amount function, which will be further down in this contract. So it's not automatic, but as soon as that's called, assuming there's a new TRB price reported, then there will be a different stake amount.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to note for reporters is it's not like you become unstaked at any point. those tokens are always locked until you run the request staking withdraw function, which is the same as previously. So like in the example, if you had 100 tokens staked and now the staking amount moves to it only being 50 because the price doubled, it wouldn't be like some of those tokens unlock or anything. You can now just report twice as often because you basically have 2 stakes now. So instead of being able to report once every 12 hours, now you can report twice every 12 hours, or once every 6 hours. And then similarly, if the price goes down, so like if you need to go stake more, those other ones are still locked. You just can't submit until you submit more. And that's the way it works.
But also I want to go back to why there's a token there on the constructor. And basically for when we go to other chains and we bridge the TRB token, there's a different token address. Also, if there's a chain that doesn't have an active or a functioning bridge, we can actually use something else. So it makes the structure more flexible, and so that we can use it, anywhere we deploy.
Yeah, and then if we move on from the constructor, you can see we have an init function, and that's just for inputting a governance address. We need that just because of an order of operations when deploying. Governance needs a Tellor address, and the Tellor Oracle needs a governance address. So that can only be called once and only called by the address that deploys the contract. There is an add staking rewards function. And so that is, again, a new update for Tellor 360. Anyone can add staking rewards. 2% of all tips added to the autopay contract get added over into the Oracle as staking rewards. And also on Ethereum mainnet, some of the time-based rewards will be allocated as staking rewards.
Yeah, so this is to kind of clarify, this is another new function, and this is a new thing in Tellor 360. So if you are staked Tellor 360, so you deposit your stake as one of the reporters, you get staking rewards just for being staked. So you don't have to report, you don't have to do anything. You get a small amount of rewards just for being staked. And the way that those rewards are paid to you is based upon people calling this function. So whenever people tip TRB, 2% of it goes to this function. So it'll go here and get distributed basically pro rata to all of the staked token holders. So if there's 10 staked, 10 reporters with each with 1 stake, they get 1/10 of the reward each. And yeah, that one, if you get, or if other people want to call it and add some rewards, feel free.
Yeah. And then if we look at the deposit stake function, that one is a little different from mainnet Ethereum Tellor X, in that now you can input an amount that you want to deposit. So you can really deposit any amount. So that also means you can have multiple stakes on one address.
Yeah, so this is the same as for the reporters. If you've been reporting on Polygon or any non-mainnet, this is the same function. So it'll basically just allow you to deposit all of your stakes with one address versus on mainnet Ethereum where you have to have multiple addresses.
Right. And you can also call this function with a 0 amount if you want to claim any pending staking rewards. That's one little note. And then we have a remove value function only callable by governance. And that's basically the same as it's been on Tellor Flex on Polygon for a while. And request staking withdraw has an amount input, And again, that's similar to how it's been for a little while. To withdraw your stake, you first request your stake and withdraw, wait 7 days, and then you can actually withdraw your stake with the withdraw stake function further down. Slash reporter is another function that only governance can call. And so when someone calls begin dispute on governance, then governance will call both remove value and slash reporter. And so that, let's see, that sets the reported value to 0. And then slash reporter transfers the reporter's stake over to governance, and then pending the outcome of the dispute, it'll get transferred to the appropriate party.
But I think that's
Yeah,
also
but-
something to note. So, if you're a reporter, what you can do is, you'll probably have, say 10, say you'll have 10 stakes all at one address. If one of them gets disputed, it just transfers that stake over to the governance address, and you basically just lose that stake. And then after the vote, the governance address will send it back to you if you want it or you lose it. But you don't it doesn't stop you instantly with all of your stakes. You can keep reporting with your other stakes just fine. It's just that one stake is gone. So keep that in mind.
And then there's the popular function submit value. It has pretty much the same inputs that people are familiar with: query ID, a value, which is in bytes, a nonce, and query data. Yeah, that function, let's see, it again, one change for 360 is that's your stake amount is adjusting over time. So that's going to affect the frequency that you can report with any given fixed stake amount.
Yeah, but I think that function's mainly the same.
Right.
So
and then update stake amount, I mentioned before, that's how the single stake amount gets updated manually. So it will read the most recent 12+ hour TRB price and adjust the stake amount. And then withdraw stake is pretty much exactly the same function as it's been for a while. That is just the last function in the staking withdrawal process. And then we just have lots of getters for retrieving values and all sorts of information about a report. And you can retrieve pending rewards, staking rewards, and different parameters in the system, and information about stakers. I think this get staker info is a kind of important getter for reporters. And then there's just some internal functions that were used by some of the functions above, like updating stake and rewards, and the logic for updating a stake amount and allocating rewards correctly.
And for people, this is like a giant function that's like really hard to understand. But we just stole this, right?
We did. We took it from Sushi Swap's. I think it was yield farming logic.
So we did not reinvent the real wheel here. So if you want to know how it works identical to like a yield farming piece where you deposit it and then over the next 30 days, it's going to get distributed amongst all the holders. So
Exactly. And so that's about it for the Tellor Flex contract. I guess we can move on to governance.
sure.
So governance, again, has a couple of storage variables up at the top. You can see it also has one of those variables is an auto pay addresses query ID. So disputes in governance handle 4 different stakeholder groups: the token holders, the users, the team multisig, and what's the last one I'm missing? The reporters. So reporters get one point, 1 vote weight for each report. Token holders get 1 vote weight point for each token held, including staked tokens. The team multisig gets one vote, and then users get 1 vote weight per token transferred into autopay. So the fact that we can have multiple autopay contracts going on simultaneously, the system allows for that. So we need some way to track those autopay addresses. And so the way we're doing that is we're reporting an array of autopay addresses to the Oracle. So then governance, whenever there's a dispute, governance can retrieve that array of addresses and then retrieve the user data from each autopay address. So it can figure out how many tips were added by a voter. So let's see, we have some structs relevant to disputes and tallies and votes, various events. And then the constructor has an input of the Tellor Oracle and also the team multisig. So again, the governance contract needs to know the team multisig address because the team multisig is one of the 4 stakeholder groups. We have a begin dispute function, which is again pretty similar to how it's been on Polygon, and it's actually pretty similar to TellorX as well. So it just has an input of a query ID and a timestamp to determine a specific report that's being disputed. And then begin dispute will call /reporter to remove the reporter stake, and it will call remove value to set the disputed value to 0. On to execute vote. I guess actually tally vote comes first actually in the process. So tally votes is very similar to how it's always been for a while. Input of a dispute ID to figure out it compares the vote weights of all those different stakeholder groups to determine the outcome of the vote. If let's see, if the votes in favor outweigh the sum of votes against and invalid, then the vote goes in favor of the disputer. And then if votes against outweigh support plus invalid, it goes in favor of the staker or reporter. And otherwise the dispute goes to invalid. And then the staker gets their stake back. The disputant gets their dispute feedback. And also, in the case that a reporter does get their stake back in a dispute, they will have to restake that particular stake. So then after the vote is tallied, there is a 1-day waiting period, and then the vote can be executed. And it's at that point in time that the stake and dispute fees are transferred. And otherwise, if execute vote, or if someone else calls begin dispute before execute vote is called within that 1-day waiting period, we can go to another vote round. And that works again, similarly to how it's been working for a little bit on Polygon and Ethereum mainnet. And then we have the vote function with inputs of a dispute ID, in support, and invalid query. And that one is also similar to the governance on Polygon.
Yeah, I think the only thing that changed from like this versus the flex governance that we've had before was that auto pay piece.
Yeah.
I think literally everything else is exactly the same. So I don't think, or am I right in saying that?
I think that's right. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you'll notice, yeah, it's pretty simple. And I mean, the only difference between this and then mainnet would be mainnet currently just uses the token weighted balance, but now we're shifting to using the Polygon governance, or the governance that was on the other networks, which includes the reporters and the users having a share. So
Yeah, exactly.
cool.
Yeah, and then we just have more getters to get all sorts of information about disputes. We've got an internal function for retrieving the user tips from the autopay contracts. And yeah, that's it for governance. And then we have an autopay contract. So autopay handles one-time tips, and it also handles recurring data feed tips. So it also works very similar to how it's been working on Polygon. So we start again with a few storage variables.
Well, I think that query data storage at the top is new. If you want to talk about that for a sec.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. So we created a very tiny contract, query data storage. And that just stores a mapping from a query ID to query data. So anytime some new query data is tipped on autopay, then now that query data gets saved over in this query data storage contract, which I can pull up. It's a nice, simple little contract. So this only needs to be deployed one time per network. And so anyone can store some data there by inputting bytes, and then this contract automatically hashes the bytes to get its query ID or just its key value, its key. So then that should be a handy contract for anyone who needs to figure out what query data is mapped from some query ID. Let's see. So yeah, we have some structs for storing data about our recurring feeds and our one-time tips, a couple of events. And then in the constructor, we take the Tellor Oracle address, the query data storage contract address, and a fee amount. So again, that fee is a certain percentage taken out of each tip, and it gets sent over to the Oracle as staking rewards.
And we'll be setting that to 2% on any of the ones that we deploy. So people know.
We have a claim one-time tip function. So that takes an input of a query ID and an array of timestamps. So you can claim multiple one-time tips at once. These one-time tips work very similarly to the add tip function in Tellor X or tip query. So you add a tip for a particular query ID, and then the next reporter that reports, assuming they don't get disputed, they get to claim that tip. And if they do get disputed, then the next person can just come in and report and wait 12 hours and then claim the tip. So actually with this system, you don't have to add a new tip if your report gets disputed. And then there's the claim tip function, which takes in a feed ID, a query ID, and an array of timestamps. So a feed ID is designated for each unique recurring autopay feed, which we can see how that's calculated in a function below. And then the unique query ID. And again, in this function, you can claim multiple tips at once using that array of timestamps. Oh, and also the autopay, the recurring tips, they will expire after 1 month. So you will have to claim them within a month's time, as opposed to the one-time tips, those don't expire, so they can be claimed anytime after the 12-hour waiting period. There is the fund feed function. Again, it takes in the feed ID, query ID, and amount. There is the setup data feed. And so this is used for setting up your recurring data feed. And it takes in a number of arguments. A query ID, a reward. So that is the amount paid per report. Start time. When does the data feed start? After which time people can start reporting and claiming tips. There is an interval. So actually, to add some context for that, if you want to set up a data feed, for example, for every day between midnight and 1 a.m., you would set your interval for 24 hours, your window for 1 hour, and then your start time for midnight. And that would give you a recurring feed every day between 12 and 1. We have a price threshold. So this works for reported values or query types that are uint. So it works particularly for prices, like spot prices. So that's used in the case where someone can report outside of the designated time window. So say if you want a report whenever a price changes by 2%, then someone can claim a tip outside of that time interval if what they reported was greater than or equal to 2% of a change from the previous report. There's also a new input, the reward increase per second. So now you can set a kind of time-based reward within these auto pay windows. So if you set a reward at 10 and a reward increase per second of 1, someone who reports at the first second in a window, they'll just get that 10 TRB reward. But if they report 1 second later, they'll get 11. So the idea of that is to allow for users to incentivize reporters in the case where gas prices are fluctuating and TRB prices are fluctuating. So in the case that gas prices were to rise above like the TRB reward, you would want to make sure you can still incentivize a report. So hopefully if you set that increase per second such that it eventually reaches a profitable amount, then someone should hopefully report within the interval. And you can also set that to 0 to just get flat rewards. And then there's the query data input and also an amount. So you can actually fund the feed at the same time that you're setting up the data feed. And then there's a tip function. This is the one-time tip function. You input a query ID, an amount, and query data. And again, so the next reporter who's undisputed her reports will get the tip. And then we move on to some getters. And you can get different information about feeds, current tips that are available, more information about feeds. And then there are some internal functions. One for converting your bytes to integers, unsigned integers. And then some internal functions that calculate how much of a reward is owed to any reporter, given a query ID and timestamp. And same goes for interval feeds. And that's about it for autopay.
I don't know if we mentioned the 2% fee or why we implemented the 2% fee, but yes, you know, anybody that stakes gets a part of it only if they actually participate on any disputes, voting on any disputes. So it's not just a freebie, like you have to be staked and then you also have to participate on voting. And we implemented that basically to just incentivize users or to have a way to for the users to incentivize voting on the disputes by the reporters and everybody in the system. So anyway, it's not just a freebie.
Nice. Yeah, that's an important one.
Is that like a percentage as well? Like depending on how how many votes
Yes,
you voted on, that's the percentage of the 2% you'll get?
yes. The 2% is decreased by the amount of times you don't vote.
Got it.
Yeah, so if you participate in 0 out of 1 votes, you get 0 stake and reward. 1 out of 2, 50%. So I guess we could move on to the Tellor 360 contract. So this will be on Ethereum mainnet, and this is used for upgrading the TRB token. And it also upgrades the Oracle address used by Liquidity and Ampleforth, so they can keep reading values from the Oracle without any changes on their end. So this 360 contract, it was also called the controller contract in Tellor X. And this is the address that we are proposing to update the Tellor system to on Tellor mainnet. So it takes an input of a Tellor Flex Oracle address in the constructor. So after the upgrade proposal on mainnet goes through and gets executed, then that means that the controller is set in Tellor X as this new, Tellor master on mainnet. It's set as this new Tellor 360 contract. And also, so once that's set, then that controller contract cannot be upgraded again. So after it gets executed, then any address can call this init function. And what that will do is it will Set the Oracle address as the new flex address. It also sets some parameters for figuring out time-based rewards and dev allocation rewards. So it just sets the timestamp, the last allocation timestamps on those to the time the init function was called. It also transfers any TRB that was sitting in the governance contract over to the team. So the purpose for that is because during the transition period, there's a little bit of time when disputes that happened in Tellor X cannot be resolved. Because after transition, the Tellor X governance can't be used anymore. So if we're in mid dispute and we can't execute a dispute, then any tokens would have otherwise been locked. So in the unlikely case that there's a dispute during the transition period, the team will be able to recover any dispute fees and transfer them to the appropriate parties. We still have a migrate function for migrating old TRB tokens. Now there's a mint to Oracle function. So this is used for time-based rewards, which this will have to be called manually. So it allows minting of 146 tokens per month. I'm sorry, daily. So that will have to be called over time. Anyone can call it, and it just automatically sends the correct amount of tokens over to the Oracle. And a portion of those minted tokens also get added as staking rewards. There is also a mint to team function. It mints the same amount as mint to Oracle, and these get minted to the team at a fixed rate.
Yeah, and for people to understand, so this is the big difference. So mint to Oracle is the time-based rewards. So if you run it, if we can theoretically now run out of time-based rewards, and then you got to come back and refill it. That's a difference for miners to understand. So if we're out of time-based rewards, you got to refill it. And then, but as far as amounts go, these are the same amounts. So we're just continuing them. So you shouldn't notice. It's not like rewards are going to go down or up for the team or the Oracle. So don't worry about that.
And anybody can call that function, right?
Yep.
So
Yes. We also added a transfer out of contract function. So this is a little, I guess, safety net for when people accidentally send their TRB tokens to the token address. It's happened a couple of times. So this allows the team to recover those tokens, and then we can refund them to the appropriate party. And that only goes for tokens sent to the master address and not to any other contracts.
and do you want to talk about why we added that?
Yeah, so that right now there's a balance over at the TRB token address with TRB tokens transferred to that address. And right now nobody can move them or touch them. They're stuck with the current token address.
They were accidentally sent there, by the way.
Accidentally, yeah.
So they're logged. So basically they lost those tokens. And we're trying to make sure that if they do that by accident in the future, and they can prove that they're the ones that send it, we can just send it back to them. So
Yeah, and this is, there were a few options here, like you could have just prevented it in the transfer function, sending it to the contract address. The problem there is then it's an extra check, which is a little extra gas in every single transaction. We didn't want to do that for the once or twice people have sent tokens here. And then the other thing is you could have allowed people just to withdraw their own. The problem that we realized with actually the migration of TRB is that a lot of times if it's a contract that sends them here or an exchange or something, you can't really send them back to the exact same address sometimes. So that's it.
Yeah, and then there's another kind of new structure here, update Oracle address. So we need a way in the future, if we want to upgrade the Oracle address beyond the new Tellor 360 Oracle, we need a place. We want to be able to mint time-based rewards to another new Oracle. We want to make sure any users who are using the Tellor master address to read Oracle values, we want to make sure they continue to get values from any future Oracle. So we have an update Oracle address function. And so we are able to tell the system that there's a new Oracle address using the current Oracle. So the new Tellor Flex Oracle that we're deploying with 360, we can report a new Oracle address to the Tellor Oracle address query type. And there's a process for upgrading that where someone can report a new Oracle address, wait 12 hours, and then call this update Oracle address function. And then the proposed Oracle address will be saved. And then you wait another 7 days, call this same update Oracle address function again. And if the reported Oracle address is still the same as what was proposed 7 days ago, then the system will upgrade the Oracle address to the new one. And then that's about it for this contract's functions. Now, this Tellor 360 contract also imports a token contract. This is pretty much a simple token contract. Now it does have a function for transferring a disputed Tellor X stake, which can only be called by the team. And it allows us to transfer that stake over to whoever should appropriately receive it. And then otherwise, it has pretty standard ERC20 functions. Now there is this allowed to trade function still in it, and that is really just for handling disputed Tellor X reporters. So it's just for handling that transition period, so that once we transition, if some reporter is currently disputed, they can't just take their disputed stake right away.
Yeah, and then you guys notice
And-
at the end there, the checkpoints. I know we had originally thought about removing them. Long story short, it's much more difficult than we had just removing them would be difficult and sort of really expensive from a gas standpoint. So we were gonna save them to remove it to save you guys some gas, but it would actually cause more issues in the long run. So we decided to keep it for now. So we're stuck with it. You can query historical balances, which is cool.
Yeah, but otherwise the system doesn't really use those checkpoints, but that's
Yeah.
just a way of storing balances. And yeah, that's about it for the token. And then last but not least, we have another contract that is imported by the Tellor 360 contract, the new transition function. And
And this
it
one,
has a lot of,
yeah, I mean, this one to point out, like this one's already in Tellor X. This one's basically the same as the previous one that's in Tellor X. So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it just provides some legacy getters for any users that have been using our system for a little while. Getter for address variables. And yeah, it really is the same for the most part as Tellor X's transition contract. And that's about it for the Tellor 360 contracts.
Yeah, no, super solid, Tim. Any last questions, guys? Overall, I think, for me, it's a much simpler update. If you're a dev or a reporter watching this, you're not going to notice a whole lot different, especially if you're already reporting or playing around with the Polygon, the version currently on Polygon or any non-mainnet version. It's basic. It's really, really similar. So there's just a few little caveats on how it works and how we update things like the time-based rewards and fix that structure. So super excited to see it go live. And yeah,
I think for the reporters, the main thing is like how they calculate their profitability. And I think it's pretty straightforward now that Tim has walked us through it. And then the major thing for the entire system is basically that after this, there's no voting on updating to a new system. So basically how Tim just discussed the change in the Oracle address, what that does is basically tells the contract where to mint to Oracle so that you get the time-based rewards. And that's it. Like there's no more voting. It's just depends on what the community agrees. It's the new Tellor. And yeah.
Yeah, so also these the Tellor Flex Oracle contract, governance, autopay, those contracts should keep working forever, even if some new versions are released in the future. It's similar to Uniswap, where if someone sets in stone that they're using this Oracle address, then it should keep working for them.
Right. They can just tip it themselves.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions that you think the reporters might have, or?
well, if they have any other questions, feel free to talk to us in the Discord. We'll answer them on any calls. So thanks, everyone.